For looping through arrays, strings, objects, or any iterable in JavaScript, we can use any type of loops. But actually, there are two types of loops in JavaScript which are tailor-made for working with arrays, strings, and iterables. So in this video, I'm going to talk about for in and for off loops in JavaScript. Let's begin with for off. Actually, we can use for off loop to loop through arrays, strings, and any iterable object. By every iteration that this loop makes, it gives us access to each single element inside our array or strings. So as you can see here, we have a singers array. So now let's see how we can iterate over this array using for off loop, because this loop is used for iterating over arrays and strings and iterable objects. So we should write for, then inside this parentheses we can have a variable and then our iterable object. So in this case, let's define our variable, let's name it x, and then we should use the off keyword. Let x off, then our array or string or any iterable object here. So let's use singers array and then our loop body. Now this loop gives us access to each single array element per iteration. For example, if we log the x in the console, and let's see. As you can see, it has printed all of the elements within this array. So as you can see, it is super simple to use for off loop when we are working with arrays. Now we don't have to worry about the counter, the condition for terminating this loop, and so on. So we just have two lines of code here and we are working with array. And just like this, we can use this for off loop with our strings as well. So if we change this to language, so as you can see here, this language stores the JavaScript text. And now when we are saying for let x of language console.log x, so every time this loop runs, this x will be a single element within this string. And if we see, as you can see, it has printed all of the letters inside this string. So this is using for off loop. As you can see how simple it is to use for off loop and loop through our arrays or strings or any iterable objects. We first define a variable. Now every time this loop runs, this variable will be one of the items inside this array or string. Now let's see for in loop, and let me paste another example here. As you can see here, we have an object, and for looping through an object, for looping through its properties and its values, as you can see, these are properties and these are values. These are key value pairs inside this object. Now for looping through these properties and their values, we can use for in loop in JavaScript. So we have for in loop for looping through objects. Now let's see how we can work with for in loop. First, we define our for, then our parentheses, and just like for off loop, we should define a variable here. Let's name it x, you can name it anything. And now instead of off, we can use in. After in, we can have our object's name, so in here it is fighter, and then our loop body. Now by every iteration that this loop makes, it gives us access to any of these keys or values inside this object. So first of all, let's log the x in the console and let's see what is x itself. And now if we see, as you can see, our x is our keys inside this object. You can see first name, last name, age, and record. These are the keys or properties within this fighter object. And now how about the values of these properties within this object? In order to access values for the properties within an object, we can use the bracket notation. So here we have our fighter object. You know that typically when we want to access a property within this fighter object, we can use dot then the property name, for example first name. But as you can see here, we have the x, and this x is a variable which every time this loop iterates, it will be a different property here. So here, instead of having a single property, either first name, last name, or age, so we can have this x. Now how can we put this x in here so that every time this loop runs, it gets fighter dot first name, the next time fighter dot last name, age, and record. So it is simple, and instead of using the dot notation, we can use the bracket notation, and this way this x remains a variable. So every time this loop runs, this x will be different values. And now if we see our console, as you can see, it has printed the values of each of these properties. And of course we can have both of them here. So let me cut this. Let's use template strings here. First we display the x, which is the property name, and then we put a colon indicating that this is the key and this is the value. And here we can have our values. And now if we see our console, as you can see, first name Habib, last name Nurmagomedov, and so on. So this is how we can use for in loop in JavaScript. We use for in loop to iterate and loop through an object in JavaScript. Alright guys, this was all about for in and for off loops in JavaScript. I really hope this video will be helpful for you. If it was, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and also if you want to see more videos just like this, then make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching and have a nice time.